Well, thank you for listening to me. Thank you for welcoming me back after almost 20 years of the beginning stages of my metalsmithing interest and now career. And thank you, Hillary. That was amazing. Okay. As promised in their motto, there's an American girl for every girl. Yes. Oh, yes. Okay. It's as if the executives at American Girl were trolling my Instagram, looking for black girl bicycle, mixed race girl bicycle, or black girl adventure. As I've moved across this United States of ours, I take my experiences, my past environments, memories of landscape, my culture and ethnicities, my creative cultures, friends and family, and use this to feed my art. History is present in me and is visible through my skin. I manage the burden of this history and filter it through the lens of contemporary body adornment, sculpture, and jewelry. I was born and raised in Southern California, about 45 minutes north of Los Angeles. While still part of Los Angeles County, our small town could not have seemed further or more disconnected from Los Angeles. In the 80s, people sought sanctuary here. Suburban neighborhoods had been popping up since the 60s, and then by the late 80s, we became known as the city of Santa Clarita. Now famous for television gems such as Santa Clarita Diet and Weeds, the SCV, as it was lovingly called, was a sleepy little suburb. For kids, this was a place for exploring, bike riding, building forts, going on adventures, going to town, which meant taking a bus to Newberry's, a Walmart-type store where you could buy Keds out of huge crates, buy goldfish, get your ears pierced, all without your parents' permission and all under one roof. This is where I spent the majority of my year. In turn, my holidays were spent visiting my father and relatives in South Central LA. This was a completely different reality. It was a decidedly urban environment flanked by the Pacific Ocean just 8 miles away to the west, which I actually didn't realize how close that was until I was putting this slide presentation together because we never went to the beach when I visited my father's side of the family. And then the LAX, or Los Angeles International Airport, was just 6 miles also to the west. My aunt's home was smack dab in the middle of South Central. It was a predominantly black neighborhood when I was a child, which eventually became mostly Latino, starting in the late 80s and early 90s. We were allowed to play outside, but only in the backyard, and if we went on any kind of adventure, it was supervised. My aunt's neighborhood was ground zero for the Rodney King riots, which happened just as I was about to graduate from high school. So I think that was in 1992. While I was privileged enough to not be directly affected by the riots, their influence dictated how I viewed and reacted to its aftermath. These experiences ultimately shaped my life in such a way that I realized that I could choose to be a part of this culture or choose to not be. My curiosity for cultures and people both of my own heritage, but also the ones that are mythologized and cornered into a shaped existence. Ones that have societal support and others which were forced upon them. These two worlds could not be more opposite aesthetically and experientially. Ultimately, I learned that I could occupy either space, and it was completely my choice to indulge and leverage or create my own path. As an adult, my desire to both leave my hometown and to experience other areas of the country meant moving a lot. As an adult, I have moved 25 times in the same number of years. Each state and region has had a profound effect on the work I create, and it's always looking to my history for content. I discovered Pratt Art Center in Seattle, Washington, soon after we moved to Seattle in 2001, and this is where I learned metalsmithing and jewelry making, and welding, and glass bead making, and enameling. Collage work, maybe some sewing classes thrown in there. Without this foundation, my work would absolutely not be where it is today. As a student at Pratt, I remember conversations I had with friends about jewelry who had degrees in art and metal. which was most of them. I was getting their ideas of a degree versus a not degree, and I stubbornly made the stance that I would never attend an art school for jewelry, because I didn't want to make the work of my professors. I was very opinionated, and I was also very naive. I say this as someone who finally made her way to the academy, has 2 degrees in metal, and is now a professor of metal influencing future metalsmiths. I take this position very seriously and hope to influence these young people to seek adventure and experience, which in turn will feed their art. Not only to look to the academy to do this for them. I have found that my foundation at Pratt, combined with experiences in my childhood, my Black experience, and my interest in material culture, is what has shaped my practice. After fumbling through my own hardwired assumptions about academia, I settled in and began exploring material. So this is in undergrad. Something I didn't do at Pratt. Pratt was a place where I learned skill, practiced various skills, and then honed those skills. And I'd also like to mention that Nancy Megan Corwin, who is here, I don't know where she is, she's my very first metalsmithing teacher. There she is, yeah. The overarching themes of my work are concerning presumptions and associations. When I choose material, I'm thinking about what the viewer sees, and what does the viewer see that I'm not seeing, and from that information, and from your experiences, what assumptions are you, the viewer, making about someone? Stereotypes. A study by Haviland, an author who writes about social identity, personality, and gender, explains the self emerges from a life of interlocution, moving through time as self-conceptions are constructed. Ordered, reordered, contested, revised, pulled apart, and renewed during a person's lifetime. Through our social and interactional practices, we continually create identities, institutions, and ideologies. All of these things that we build, culture, language, identity, morality, we build together. At SUNY New Paltz, I had a set deadline and a set of expectations from my instructors to work towards a body of work that was cohesive, was framed by an idea, and that was influenced by Jory's history and by my own. This first piece, made from copper, enamel, rickrack, and jersey fabric, was created for my first body of work entitled A Gathering of Instants. I was exploring first that idea that there could be an idea behind a piece of body adornment, and second, my relationship with my mom, our instances of creative enterprise. I cannot speak about the assumptions that others make, but working in a way where the material and its embedded meaning and the tactile nature of fabric and the memories that fiber contains were topics that I focused in on and carried throughout this series. I was also interested in how materials express language. In order to frame my ideas of combining seemingly feminine materials with masculine practice, I looked to explanations of how material culture and material language evolves and it's ultimately fabricated. Alison Paige Burkett, professor of linguistics and material culture, writes, the work of Judith Butler, 1990, explains that gender is something that one does, rather than something that one is. A person's performance of gender is ongoing, as repeated acts within a rigid regulatory frame, congealing over time, to produce the social appearance of gender. This is how social constructs are made. Butler is arguing that all social constructs, such as gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and identity more generally, are practice-based gains grounded in linguistic anthropology. This analysis reveals the ways in which social identities are created, recreated, and negotiated in interactional spaces. The individual self is viewed as discursive. From my vantage point as a maker of objects, and more specifically, objects for the body, I'm interested in how the material speaks, and how the material I choose moves through these ideas of social constructs. Burkett goes on to explain that materiality or material goes beyond the physical. Materiality can be used to describe anything that has an effect. This way of thinking blurs the lines between thing, image, and being. Materiality is the real, something that lies beyond the material, the apparent. Materiality transcends the dualism of subjects and objects, allowing us to look beyond the person as the ultimate subject whose position is reified by material objects. An artist that I admire very much, Yinka Shonabare, stated that things are not always what they seem. And I believe his work transcends this object that I speak of. His work that relies heavily on the material language of African wax print fabrics expresses the dual nature of assumption and fact. Historically, these kinds of batik-like prints were Indonesian or Javanese in origin. For several reasons, and one being the colonization of Africa, the Dutch saw an opportunity to mass produce in Europe. A new African market opened as the Dutch ships passed through to recruit Africans for the Dutch colonizing army in Indonesia. Quickly, Africans bought the fabrics and started to dictate the designs to adhere to a more African aesthetic. I wanted this necklace to tell that story in a very simplified fashion. There is an actual piece of African wax print fabric adhered to a piece of wood next to a white enameled disc as you move up the necklace. The other disc is painted in an interpretation of the original. So it's like simulacra. It's like the real, then the real, and the real. As you move around to the beginning again, the main necklace beads are hand-cut apple wood from the farm I lived on in New Paltz, which was selling off its land to the university. This necklace tells that story, the market economies, assumptions, and appropriations. Carol, Black Carol, this necklace, is maybe the most personal in my collection. Being of dual race, there seemed to be a need for people to always solve the mystery of what are you? Growing up in the 80s and in a predominantly white neighborhood, it was mostly assumed that I was black. At grocery stores or other retail situations, if I was with my mom, it was never assumed that she was my mom. As a teenager, I corrected people all the time. For some reason, I always felt bad for making that person feel uncomfortable. But the most puzzling part is that as a teenager and an early adult, I looked just like my mom. In fact, my husband calls me Black Carol. But moving on, I decided to play on this assumption of racial belonging or unbelonging and separate the sections of this necklace with a white enameled component holding an African wax print component. To leave room for materials to use their own language or create a new language, sometimes parameters need to be set. Repetitive patterning, volume, and color allow for the viewer to understand the image before them as not simply fiber and metals, but rather an active collection creating an abstract form. The idea becomes secondary, but in collection or a body of work viewed together, all of my fiber and metal pieces form a story about gathering, coming together from disparate parts, one part relying on another, two parts ungendered. What the Academy has afforded me are opportunities to explore regions of the country I might not have otherwise had access. The summer between my undergrad and grad school, my professor, Jamie Bennett, asked me to be his TA at Haystack Mountain School. I had no idea what this meant or how profoundly it would have impacted my life as an artist, but it did and has. Haystack's idyllic setting off the coast of Maine only asks you to do one thing, and that is to make work. Everything else is done for you. It's kind of how like having your own Mr. Belvedere. And to top it off, Haystack is right on the ocean. It's incredibly picturesque. And you have 24-hour access to the studios. After having that experience, I made it a mission to immerse myself into creative environments as much as possible. I've been back to Haystack almost every year since, in several capacities, but this year I taught my first 2-week workshop. I'm not sure if Jamie was aware of how much Haystack would affect my life, but I'm deeply indebted to him for this opportunity. Much like my experiences at Pratt in my formative years, being amongst 80 other like-minded people for an intense 2-week period should be compulsory. Madison, Wisconsin. Beautiful, cold, isolated, flat, its own little utopia. This is where I went to grad school. On my walk to class, I watched seasons change in the tall reeds along Lake Mendota. They were quite beautiful. They were tall, up to 9 feet. And as the weather got colder, the reeds turned brown, but stood strong until the spring, when new growth would start popping up in between and eventually would take over as the old reeds would decay. One of my first pieces I made was this necklace from these dried reeds I cultivated from the banks of Lake Mendota. And as part of a routine, the reeds became a natural choice for my new project. The title of this piece is The Voyage. Each basket is carefully woven around a wire base connected by knitted yarn. I was quickly adapting to my new environment, something that was a strength for me since I did move a lot. What's interesting for me is that the natural materials, such as these, are quickly associated with tribal craft, both indigenous and African. The challenge was how do I move beyond these associations and assumptions that Black people make Black craft? So I really pushed myself to explore all aspects of material and to really dig into this language. I could then make the choice to embrace its obvious use or dissect it. Presenting my work in necklace form was a way for me to tell a complete story. I could choose to make a focal point or continue the story all the way around. What I reflected on is that the importance of the story is how it's presented to the wearer. It's vital to the piece, or presented on the wearer. It's vital to the piece. This necklace, entitled Only Part of the Story, was inspired by an interview I conducted of my aunt and uncle on my dad's side, the South Central LA family. Excuse me. I don't remember many conversations with my dad, as he had ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, and died when I was in 7th grade. This disease attacks your neuromuscular system, and as a result, you become paralyzed. Work I called African and American, taken from this retail establishment in Madison, Wisconsin. I was looking at artists such as Xavier Simmons, Lorna Simpson, Glenn Ligon as inspiration. Huey Copeland's book, Bound to Appear, Art, Slavery, and the Site of Blackness in Multicultural America, featured some of these artists. It was really my textbook through grad school. Huey Copeland shows that their projects draw on strategies associated with minimalism, conceptualism, and institutional critique to position the slave as a vexed figure, both subject and object, property and person. They also engage the visual logic of race and modernity and the challenges negotiated by Black subjects in the present. It's an amazing book, you should look at it. What did this mean for me and my work? As an emerging artist, how do I insert myself into this dialogue and contribute something meaningful? And how can I justify jewelry as a meaningful object of inquiry? The most relevant jewelry objects of today, I believe, objects of desire, are flaunted by celebrities daily. Whether it is over the top bling or understated, celebrities dictate the market. They determine the desire. My inquiry into these objects of desire led to the development of my sgraffito work. This first piece, right here, Big Pimpin', is made from enameled copper discs that are riveted with 18 karat gold to a 24 karat gold plated frame. One of the most prolific African kings, King Musa, king of the Mali Empire from 1312 to 1337, reigned for 25 years. Musa made an epic pilgrimage to Mecca, displaying the splendor and majesty of Mali. His convoy purportedly included 60,000 men, including 12,000 slaves, each carrying 4 pounds of gold bars, and heralds dressed in silks, possessing gold staffs, horses, and handled bags. On a darker but more realistic side to contemporary bling jewelry, Black bodies are still seen as quantifiable objects. Moneymakers, hip-hop stars, and athletes are modern-day slaves offered to the highest bidder. I continued in this theme with this brooch, combining the narrative structure of a necklace into a stationary object, a different kind of badge, one that can stand on its own as both object and wearable object, an object of exchange and a wearable object with function. In order to ground this work, I needed to expose my story just a little. I imagine that being the mom of 2 black babies in the 70s was hard. Hard in the sense that only 6 years prior, Martin Luther King was assassinated and bigotry and hatred was still very palpable. Despite this reality, I never felt or experienced any kind of racially charged bigotry. Only through my eyes did I formulate differences. These differences were based in my own insecurities, my hair being one of those insecurities. I think it's pretty rare for anyone to fully embrace their attributes, body, hair, eye color, etc. But for black women, hair is very important. African American artists such as Lorna Simpson and Sonia Clark both deal with hair in their work. In Simpson's series, Collages, writer and scholar Elizabeth Alexander asserts that the painted hair has a mind of its own. It is sinuous and cloudy and fully active. It is a forest, an ocean, its own emotional weather. Black women's hair is epistemology. I didn't say that right. But we cannot always discern its codes. In this work, Simpson is challenging the conventions of beauty. While I was exposed to Ebony and Jet magazines, the source of Simpson's inspiration, it took me almost 40 years to find her, a black woman role model, someone who has embraced and exalts black women's hair. Of course, my focus was on the tool, a tool I use every day. My hair is strong and often resists, but ultimately, it is this tool, my pick, that I've chosen as my badge. An identification badge. It has been modified and hacked. The tines are 24 karat gold plated. The sgraffito beads are capped by 24 karat gold end caps. And this is on display in Sharon's book room. My materials were evolving with my research. Repetitive processes became a form of therapy, whether it was making tick marks in enamel or weaving baskets. I received a quick tutorial on how to weave from Billy Rusetta at Penland, and I was off. This necklace, Pangaea, the supercontinent, symbolizes cultures coming together. The basket weaving techniques that Billy Ruth shares are traditional in her area of the South, although basket weaving dates back to the earliest humans. This particular style, Appalachian and Shaker style, derived from the Native American or First Nations of North Carolina. I was creating these basket forms and developing my own sgraffito styles simultaneously. I've recently started weaving again, but I'm trying wire and enamel, and we will see how that goes. From the same series, Canopica utilized the same basket weaving methods as Pangaea, but in 3 dimensions. I was referring to the canopic jars that the Egyptians used to store and take the viscera of the mummified bodies into afterlife. Sometimes the words translate into sculpture. Not everything needs to be worn to relate to the body. This innately phallic form requires only curiosity to interact with it. This sculpture, called Seeing Through, is made from a loofah I grew in New Paltz. I attached a peephole and lens to one side and an enameled bottom. The interior of this gourd reveals a complex structure of woven fibers where seeds attach and grow. I'm offering the viewer a way to see through, meditate, and observe. The artifacts I create are meant to capture the prejudices and preferences towards blackness as a fetishized and popularized manifestation of sexual power. My materials are not limited by expectation of form or use, but are often chosen for their texture, pattern, and cultural relevance. Hair weaving and styling is a major component in Black culture and in my work. Hair acts as a signifier of socioeconomic status, as well as commitment to Blackness or conformity to whiteness. By inverting the roles, as seen in this sculpture, I'm polarizing programmed ideas of cultural stereotypes into an aesthetic that challenges the pitfalls of categorization. When activated, the power dynamic shifts. It becomes more pertinent who takes control, who subverts it, and who interprets the action. Last year, I was offered a professorship position at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts. Located next door to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, I have access to a huge amount of resource and source material for my practice. New England's history is sordid, it's dark, it's vibrant, and it's also the home of the American Industrial Revolution. Just south of Boston is Pawtucket, Rhode Island, where Samuel Slater divulged his secrets of milling machinery. You should check that out, so. The remnants of over 100 cotton mills are rotting along the Blackstone River in Rhode Island, which reveal exciting treasures, interesting forms, beautiful colors, and an endless supply of materials of inquiry. This landscape is the polar opposite of my California upbringing, and in the past several years, I have been translating these memories of home into the work that is a blend of these two worlds. 20 years ago, I learned how to make Shibui alloy from Andy Cooperman, and it's just now popping up in my work. The alloy makes an amazing landscape that triggers memories of desert sky nights. Stars upon stars, hugged by an enameled form reminiscent of plaid or cotton material. Alongside my teaching, I've done a couple of residencies. The Smitten Forum, I attended 2 years ago, was at Ghost Ranch, New Mexico. It was a time to hang out with other metalsmiths and jewelry makers, learn from each other, and have meals together. This was one of the pieces that came out of that experience. This brooch is made from agate druzy, enamel copper, dendritic opal, and sterling silver. And I learned how to do a little bit of lapidary work from, what's his name?
You're in town?
Hmm?
You in town here?
No, he lives in Madison.
Don Freeland.
Don Freelick.
Freeland.
Yes, thank you. Yes. He's awesome. Lil Pimp, Big Pimpin's smaller brother, is a more subtle, a little more subtle, yet for the average person would make quite the statement when worn. Continued decay refers to the ongoing decay of the New England landscape. My commute has revealed some pretty startling realities of the condition of the rail system there. Luckily, I moved up to Boston from Rhode Island, so I no longer have to ride the train every day, which is like literally falling apart. This is made from a piece of rusted steel I found at the bottom of the stairs of the commuter rail station, brass rod, and enamel copper. I staged these next couple of photos in the machine shop at Slater Mill in an attempt to posit a new narrative. The stone I collected from Spooner's Cove, a beach in California's Central Coast, and the enamel cone I made while teaching at Penland. If you do ever get a chance to go to Slater Mill, their machine room is still operational, and all of the machines are run on leather straps. And when it's also hydro powered, and when the machine shop is operational, it makes so much noise that they had to build like 2-foot thick walls of stone in order to contain the sound. It's pretty amazing. So as of late, I've found myself struggling to stay focused on the research and trying to balance my new position as professor of the practice. I've noticed that it's taken me a lot longer to produce work that I'm happy with, and also I find myself making a lot of parts that aren't coming together. Sometimes I take this work apart and redo its various parts, even when the work has been out in the world. This keeps me excited about pieces. This is all at Slater Mill. I'm continuing to read Peat Forms, like I did in my earlier work with the fabric. So I'm making a lot of these tube kind of bead-like structures and putting them as individual parts in other brooches. I've also found that I can be a little bit more loose with my process. I can achieve a similar line quality by adding material instead of taking it away. So sgraffito is the act of removing the enamel, and this I'm adding, like, kind of drawing the material on. And a new material I just gained access to is wrought iron. April Franklin. So old wrought iron chain brought up from a ship's anchors is an amazing material to enamel. I was welcomed into my friend and colleague April Franklin's studio and was able to use the power hammer to forge these two paddle shapes and then bend in a vise. And then, with almost no cleaning, I was able to apply enamel, and it was just like, yes, please, give me all the enamel. The structure of the metal looks like muscle. It's got a beautiful, like, muscle, tree-like quality to it. And this is what I'm most excited about currently. Thank you.